Welcome to this Climate and Nature Summit session. So this workshop is all about how we spark social change. And when we talk about the word social, we mean you and me, because we're talking about people. We're talking about society. Okay, take 5 seconds to talk to the person beside you. What social change are we trying to spark here? We want to move from the picture on the left to the picture on the right. So what are we trying to do? We are trying to get people to eat less meat. That is just one example of a social change. Which of these professionals can help us to understand the steps that we need to take in order to spark social change? And explain why you think we need that professional. Talk to the person beside you. You've got 10 seconds. Of course, we need the psychologist, and we've got the wonderful Owen Galvin on this workshop to explain the steps that we need to take in order to spark social change. And we need a psychologist because psychology is a study of how we think, how we feel, and how we behave.
Hi, my name is Owen Galvin and I'm a psychologist. I'm working with the Psychological Society of Ireland's special interest group in addressing the climate and environmental emergency. And psychologists are interested in how people think, feel and behave, and in particular, with this group, how people think, feel and behave in relation to the climate crisis. So I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about how social change might happen. So we all know that the climate crisis is an emergency and that we should be changing. But what does that process of change look like? So I want to introduce you to a few ideas that might help us understand how we change on a social level as a society. So some of those ideas are social norm, social contagion, social comparison, social tipping point, and social movement. But let me go through them one at a time. So what is a social norm? Well, a social norm is a rule or principle that might be formal or informal that governs or shapes our behavior. So let's think of a few examples of what social norms might be. For example, the social norm is to not throw litter on the ground. The social norm is to say hello when you meet somebody. The social norm is to stand in a queue and wait your turn at a deli counter in a shop. And if you step outside of social norms, there's often a reaction. So for example, if you were in a shopping mall and you were to stand on facing the wrong direction, going up an escalator, you would no doubt feel awkward and create awkwardness around you. That's a small example of breaking a social norm. So these are quite powerful shapers that govern our behavior.
Okay, so now you should be able to understand what a social norm is. So I want you to look at each of these 4 pictures and guess what is the social norm in these situations. You've got 1 minute to talk to the person beside you. You're just at the halfway mark. Okay. Right, in the first picture, the social norm is that when you're in the classroom, if you want to ask a question or you want to speak, you put up your hand. In a library, the social norm is to be quiet. If you talk in the library, people might look at you a little bit funny. When you're out walking your dog, the social norm is to pick up your dog's poo. Now, interestingly, some people might be like, ooh, I'm out walking the dog. There's nobody around. I might just leave the poo there and not pick it up. But if they think there's a hint that somebody's watching them, they will pick it up because they don't want to look bad. And in the last picture, the social norm is that when you're finished a game or a match, that you shake your opponent's hand. You don't want to appear to be a bad loser. You want to be generous.
It's also important to know about social norms that they are always changing. They're not fixed in stone. So what was once a social norm 50 years ago may not be a social norm now. So for example, voting rights for women was once not a social norm. Now it is. And laws change and policy changes and people's behavior change once we establish a new social norm. It used to be normal for children as young as 5, 6, 7, 8 to go to work. That is no longer considered okay because it's harmful to children's development. So we established a new social norm. So now there are new rules and policies that govern our behavior around how we treat children in the workplace or not in the workplace.
You and I both know the social norms can change, and that's really positive. So have a look at each of the pictures. Describe how the social norm has changed. You've got 1 minute. About 20 seconds left. In the first picture, the idea is that we don't use plastic bags for shopping anymore. We have kind of lifelong bags that last a lot longer. We used to go to the supermarkets and just get plastic bags for our shopping, and then we'd throw them in the bin and they'd end up in the ocean or out in the streets or in landfill. And now we're a bit more conscious. We bring our own bags to the supermarket and they are more durable and last longer. In the second picture, you see a man sitting beside a woman who's pregnant and he's smoking. That is just not acceptable these days. But once, both of these things were acceptable. In the third picture, there's been a big campaign for equality. So now people who are gay can get married to their partner, which is fantastic.
So social norms are always changing. So how do we get them? How do they come about? Well, here's a couple of ideas that might help us understand that. The first is the idea of social contagion. So this is the idea that we see someone doing something and we adopt that behavior ourselves. So for example, a new app that comes out that becomes very popular suddenly becomes something that everyone is showing each other. One person shows it to another, etc., etc. And before you know it, thousands of people are, for example, throwing buckets of cold water over their head, if you remember the ice bucket challenge.
So we've just heard about social contagion. So have a look at these pictures. Can you identify what the example of social contagion is? And why did that become popular? See how many you can get through with your friend in 30 seconds. Over halfway. It was a complete craze to go out and buy Prime. Everybody was buying it. Why? Because two guys, Logan Paul and KSI, got people to do it, and people started copying each other. That was a bit of a contagion. TikTok was also a contagion. Lots of people were making these TikTok videos because people put it on their Instagram channel and they got loads of views. Chess became a bit of a craze because of the Netflix series, and also there was creators playing it. And even I think Cristiano Ronaldo is playing it too. So lots of people took it up. These are all examples of contagion. I would like to start a contagion with the Merlin Bird app. If you haven't used it, it's amazing. You basically download the app, you press record, and it records all the bird song around you and tells you which species is singing. It's cool.
That's the idea of social contagion, that we see something and then we do what we've seen, and it spreads through our society in that way. Closely related to that is the idea of social comparison, where we model our behavior on the basis of what other people are doing. If other people seem to be doing something, we think, okay, that sounds like something I might be able to do. So some research, for example, showing that if people start putting solar panels up on their roofs, that before long it kind of catches on. And some recent research looking at what helps people change their behavior, social comparison was found to be the most powerful influence. In other words, seeing other people doing things, and in particular, knowing that that's the trend and that that's going to continue, is a very powerful shaper of our behavior.
Okay, these are examples of social comparison. So look at the two pictures and think about, well, what is the social comparison here? Or the example of social comparison, and is it positive or negative? What's the impact on people and planet? You've got 1 minute to have a chat with the person beside you. Just over halfway. Okay, so we have people who are crazy about SUVs. Why? Why there are lots of people buying them? Because they have the perception that they're bigger and safer for their families. Maybe it's also a bit of a status symbol. Is it positive or negative? Well, they are big gas guzzlers or petrol guzzlers. So they're associated with lots of carbon emissions. So they're not great for climate. And if you get hit by an SUV, you've probably got less chances of surviving than if you're hit by a smaller car. And obviously, we are absolutely and utterly attached to our phones. I'm not going to get into that one, but I'm sure you had a really good discussion.
So that's social contagion and social comparison. But how many do we need in order for a change to happen? Well, this is where the idea of a social tipping point comes in. So how many people need to be putting solar panels up on their roofs, or playing with that new app, or doing the Ice Bucket Challenge before it becomes something that a huge portion of society does? And some research would suggest that about 25%, that if you introduce 25% of people who are willing to change their behavior into a group, that's enough to bring about 3/4 of the group along. So 1 in 4. And 1 in 4 is not that big. It's actually kind of achievable, isn't it?
Okay, we've got a decent amount of time for this conversation. 2 minutes. So we've been talking about social tipping points, and I'd love to know, what would you like to see crossing the social tipping point and becoming a social norm? Is that maybe everyone contacting their politicians and saying, I care about climate, I care about biodiversity, and I want to see your policies reflecting that so we get a livable future? Would you like to see native trees being a normal part of our communities or schools? reforestation of native trees? Would you like to see people moving towards plant-based diets for climate and biodiversity, or maybe flying less? Would you like to see more cycling? Or maybe you'd like to cut down on the books in your bag and we just have a class set of textbooks at the back of our room, in our classrooms, so we're not carrying them in our bag and we could use the internet for our homework. Wouldn't that be lovely? Stop us buying so many books. Or maybe you'd like to see everyone with a bamboo toothbrush, or letting their grass grow, or planting trees in their gardens at home because they could become a haven for wildlife. They'd be good for mental health and maybe even a store of food. Or maybe it's swap shops, upcycling, repair shops, having orchards dispersed in our communities. What do you want to see crossing the social tipping point? You've got 2 minutes to have a chat about that. And it might be something on this board, or it might be something completely different.
So what we need then for climate change, in order for us to change all of the behaviors that we need to change, so things like eating a plant-based diet, or not flying on holidays, using the ferry, for example, or rail and sail, and doing all of the other things that we know contribute to climate change. What we need is a social movement with lots of people engaging in behavior to create the social contagion and social comparison, so that we get to a social tipping point where there's enough people that everyone sees it, that creates a social pressure. We end up with a social tipping point, moving us into a new norm. In other words, we create new norms for ourselves so that we can create laws and policies, etc., around those norms and establish them as stable ways of behaving in society. Several examples have already been done. This is not new to us. We are more than able to do this. So, for example, if you take smoking behavior, which going back about 30 years was considered completely normal. People would have smoked in cinemas and on buses and in restaurants, and I know it's hard to believe now, but that was actually true. Then they brought in a law, they made it illegal to smoke in people's workplaces, which included restaurants and bars and all the places that people at the time liked to smoke in, cinemas and buses, etc. And there was some resistance, but with enough pressure and enough people talking about it and enough evidence to support why it was an important thing to do, we eventually established a new social norm. Now, if you were to light up a cigarette in a restaurant or a bar or a cinema or a bus, there would be a strong reaction against you, whereas before that was kind of normal. So we are capable of establishing new social norms. We are capable of building social movements to create social tipping points, using social comparison and social contagion to create new social norms around pro-environmental behaviors. Things like eating a plant-based diet, using staycations for holidays, etc. All of the things that we know we want to do.
Gosh, that is a lot of new terminology. So have a chat with your friend. You've got 1 minute. See if you can match the terms to the definitions, which are all jumbled up. You've only got a minute. See how many you can get right out of 5. We're just at halfway now. How did you do? So the first one, social norms are the rules or principles which may be formal or informal that determine how we behave. Social contagion. We see someone doing something and we adopt that behavior ourselves, like the ice bucket challenge. Comparison. Social comparison. Seeing other people doing certain things and knowing that those behaviors are becoming a trend encourages us to do the same, like putting solar panels on your roof, if you can afford it. Social tipping point, the number of people we need in order for a change to happen. And as Owen said, that's hovering around 25%, which actually isn't a lot of people. So that gives me hope. Social movement. Lots of people engaging in a behavior in support of a social goal. So that's saying like we care about climate, we care about biodiversity loss, and we want to do something about it. That's the goal. This creates social contagion, social comparison, and social pressures, all the actions that we can take to make things better and secure a livable future. And that helps us to reach a social tipping point that moves us into a new social norm.
It might be interesting to see this video. This video is a clip of a social movement happening in a very, very short period of time, but it's got some valuable lessons in it. So I'm going to let you watch the video for about 3 minutes, and then I'm going to come back and tell you what those lessons might be.
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. So it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out and you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut and it's not two nuts. 3 is a crowd and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers because new followers emulate followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, then 3 more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point, and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made. So let's recap what we've learned. If you are a version of the shirtless dancing guy, all alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals, making everything clearly about the movement, not you. Be public, be easy to follow. But the biggest lesson here, did you catch it? Leadership is overglorified. Yes, it started with the shirtless guy, and he'll get all the credit, but you saw what really happened. It was the first follower that transformed a lone nut into a leader. There's no movement without the first follower.
That was an awesome video. Okay, based on that video, here are some questions. See how many you can get through in a minute, and if you're really stuck, here are some prompts. 1 minute, off you go. Just over halfway. Right, back to Owen for some analysis.
There's a few key learnings from it. Firstly, being first can be socially awkward and uncomfortable. You kind of stand out from the crowd. You feel like you're doing something that no one else is doing. Secondly, early supporters, people who join that kind of first person, are a really important link in the chain. In fact, they're the ones who demonstrate to everyone else that it's okay to join this social movement. And they turn the lone nut dancing on his own into a leader. Third, it's important to stick with the change, even if it's slow going at the beginning. So even though this video was short, he was actually dancing on his own for about 20 minutes before the first person joined him, which might have been an interesting watch. And finally, eventually enough people join and you get a social tipping point where you have the whole crowd joining in. And now the kind of social energy moves from being something that I might be very cautious about, feeling uncomfortable about, to being, I'm missing something that's really important and I should be involved. And that's exactly what we need to do with climate change. So have a think. Where in your life are there places where you could become a leader or join someone who's already leading to become part of a social group, to demonstrate through your behavior and harness the power of social comparison and social contagion, and be part of creating a tipping point to bring us to a new social norm. Thank you very much.
There is so much that we can do. There are so many different actions that we can take to secure a livable future for us. And not just have a livable future, but have an awesome future, full of opportunities, living in a lush, verdant environment. And these are some of those actions that we've already discussed that you could possibly take, with maybe a couple of more actions. So maybe start a climate cafe in your school, join an organisation like Friends of the Earth, or join us, join the Irish School Sustainability Network. Talk to your teacher, ask them to come along to a monthly meeting and you go with them, you know? So we meet once a month, 7 to 8 p.m. in the evening online. So you can join anywhere in the country. And we're just a group of teachers and students who are coming together as a community because we're like, we care. We want to create the space for a meaningful conversation because we actually want to live a good future and we're willing to fight for it. So have a chat with the person beside you. What actions are you going to take? Are you going to lead? Are you going to follow? And we can see that actually, you know, from the video that like you need courage for both. So thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate you having a meaningful conversation in class, and I hope you enjoyed the workshop, and a big thanks to Owen Galvin too. There is also a walk and debate that you can take part in after this session, and I'd strongly encourage you do so you can have a conversation and consolidate your learning as a whole class. Take care and see you in the next Climate and Nature Summit.